efforts because we've identified a lot of stones that weren't unturned. And by all means, the users of the program, which are you and your colleagues, please communicate that their input is going to be critical. And so we're not passing over it. We're just trying to get the discussion going. Thank you. Okay, let's talk now about one of our other key initiatives, which was portfolio development of the budget, and how are we less like a state agency and more like a business in developing what our needs are, what supports the different initiatives we're hearing out of communities, and how to best leverage our dollars. So with that, Amy, Sarah, Hava.
Madam Co-Chair, members of the board, thank you for your time. Just a couple of housekeeping things. You each should have packets in your place setting that were placed during the break. There are a copy of our 2018 benchmark and annual report. Our next one will be delivered to you in December, but we wanted to bring these today because you may have some questions about metrics or some of the work that we have been doing. So we wanted to make sure you have that at your fingertips. You also have a copy of the slides that we'll walk through today for your note-taking purposes, as well as a copy of our new strategic plan. So wanted to make sure you paid attention to those. So as I sit here today, I've actually been very reflective as we've gone along with the meeting. And the biggest feelings that have been running through my head is the sense of optimism that I feel right now, and how pleased I am to be part of an extremely talented, intelligent team of people, and how pleased I am to be associated with a board who all sit here together today and talk about their community activism and talk about their reasons for why you do what you do. And ultimately, all of us in this room share this strong passion for Wyoming and for the state that we love. And that just really strikes me because it's amazing to feel the energy in the room of people who all feel that same way. So thank you for that opportunity. And I think that's a good way for us to move into this conversation today. I also feel very thankful that we have the opportunity to have adopted a strategy in May that we believe in and that we have passion for and that we know is the right thing to do. I also am thankful, and you may all chuckle a little bit at this, for the opportunity to align that with our biennium budget. And when I think about the biennium budget process, which we are in the midst of as a state agency, that biennium budget process is kicking off, and I just feel like it's such great opportunity and timing for us as the Wyoming Business Council to align our strategy, to align our opportunities, to align our potential with the dollars behind it. And you think about how that could be out of sync, and that's very realistic that it could be out of sync. But in our situation, it's not out of sync. And so I think that even makes our new strategy and what we can do with our new strategy even more powerful, because the dollars will align as we adopt this new biennium budget. So we are in a great place. We're in a great place to move forward. And we're in a great place to really make this right and do what we all know is the right thing for the state that we love. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who's going to walk through and talk a little bit about our strategy, the portfolio that we've put together, and then we'll move through some of the expertise and people pieces and land back to the budget again.
All right. Thank you, Amy. So I want to start out by talking about the just awesome team that we have at the Business Council. In addition to all of the experience and activism that we have on our board, we have incredible experience and expertise at the Business Council. We, as a state agency, we try to operate at this intersection between the public and private sector, and we have built a team that's able to do that. We've got experience from Fortune 500 companies like Accenture, like Hess. We've also got experience from local governments, local EDOs. So we are the team that can act on a strategy to take us into the future in Wyoming. As Amy said, we all have this common mission as well, and this might be the most powerful thing about our team. when you walk down the halls at the Business Council, you see Wyoming flags hanging everywhere. You can just feel the pride for Wyoming, and everybody is there for one reason, and that's to make Wyoming a great place to live and a great place for our kids to live and our grandkids to live. So it's really awesome to work at the Business Council. And I wanted to start with this to just show you how really knowledgeable and expert our team is. We are the people in Wyoming, we are the agency in Wyoming who can pull off a new strategy like the one that we have adopted in May. It's a really good thing that we have that team, because this is a team that's faced with one of the most difficult problems the state of Wyoming has ever faced. We need a more diverse economy. This looks like a lot of data. Don't get too into the numbers and the graphs. All I wanted to do with this is make the point that as commodities go, so goes Wyoming's economy, so goes GDP, so goes tax revenue. All of those red lines on there follow oil price, gas price, coal price, or production. And that can get us in some hot water. We've seen commodity prices drop in the last few years. Analysts and experts predict that that's going to continue into the future. So it's our job to figure out how to create an economy that can be sustainable regardless of those fluctuations in mineral prices and production. The Business Council strategy has been somewhat focused on diversity in the past, but it hasn't been the primary focus. It hasn't been a really, really huge focus of the Business Council in the past. On the bottom, what you see there are metrics from our old strategic plan from last year. You can see it's kind of a mixed bag. Some of those metrics we are improving upon, and some of them we're not improving upon. Overall, though, what we still see is missing is we're not increasing our diversity index score, and we're not growing GDP as fast as we would like to. So we need to figure out a way to solve that problem of creating a more diverse economy and moving the needle on those bigger picture metrics. You guys laid the foundation to do that in May. That's exactly what our vision is. It's to realize diverse, broad, and lasting growth so that Wyoming can prosper no matter the economic climate or status of any individual sector. We want to do that, as Sean mentioned this morning. This is our purpose by creating new opportunities for current and future generations of Wyomingites by adding value to Wyoming's core industries, natural resources, agriculture, tourism, and leveraging those strengths to activate new economic sectors like healthcare, finance, scientific and professional services, advanced manufacturing, build on all of the success that we saw this morning in our community tour of Sheridan. Those words are great, and that was the first step.
We love you, Brandy.
You're great staff, everyone.
That's a very diverse ring, Brandy. We can't wait to hear more about that, not in the public session.
Go ahead, Sarah.
All right. Thanks. So what you guys adopted in May was a lot of great words and set excellent intentions for creating that change that we need to see for a more diverse economy for the future. But something that Russ says all the time, Russ Elliott says all the time, what gets measured gets done. So between May and over the summer, we have developed metrics to understand whether and how well we are achieving our strategic plan. To understand if we're creating new opportunities for current and future generations of Wyomingites, we want to measure things like income, retention of youth. Are we retaining high school and college graduates in Wyoming? We also want to measure employment, so unemployment rate as well as underemployment rate. To measure whether we are achieving diverse growth, we'll look at diversity indices, both in terms of employment and real GDP. And we'll look at growth in those new sectors. So healthcare, finance, scientific professional services, advanced manufacturing. Those are the sectors that we're currently underrepresented in compared to the rest of the US. And so we're going to look at those. How are we growing those new sectors to kind of change the pieces of our economic pie to create a more diverse and resilient economy? Diversity is great, but you've got to have broad and lasting growth along with that diversity to have a long-term sustainability. So we'll continue to measure real GDP growth across all sectors in Wyoming, as well as volatility. We all know that we are subject to that kind of boom and bust cycle, and so the less volatility we have, that's an indicator of a more resilient economy for years in the future. Those are the things that we're aiming for. Really quickly on metrics, I want to note that there's a difference between how Wyoming's doing and how the Business Council is doing sometimes. There's a lot of factors that go into these metrics. Real median income, an increase in that could be a result of many different things. A decrease in that came after in 2008 when a global recession hit. So we need to understand how the Business Council is impacting those metrics, and to do that, we'll use economic models that account for those kind of external factors that are out of our control and help us understand what are the actions that we're taking, what are the programs that we are implementing, what are the impacts of those on those higher level metrics. We need to measure both those high level metrics and the programmatic metrics, because those high level metrics, that's what tells us where we need to focus our efforts in the future. We need to respond to what the Wyoming economy is doing to make sure that we're meeting the needs and creating opportunities for current and future generations of Wyomingites. Okay, so we've got these metrics. We know we need to meet them. How are we going to meet them? Our first step in doing that, we knew had to be asking our stakeholders, what do you need from the Business Council to help the state meet those high level metrics, to help the state create a diverse Wyoming economy? We reached out to over 50 individuals throughout the summer and asked them these questions. We heard from even more via online surveys. And this is just a teeny fraction of what we have heard. But what you see on this slide is kind of, are some quotes that I think kind of reflect the overall themes of what we heard from stakeholders. We heard from stakeholders that they need focus from the Wyoming Business Council. They need clarity on what are the important things to the Wyoming Business Council, what projects are prioritized in order to create a diverse economy. And they need more follow-up. They need more hands-on service and more individualized service. And they need that throughout the state in their communities. We need to bring our programs down to the local level and provide service and expertise at the local level. With all of that in mind, what we've done is we've created a portfolio of programs and services that help meet those needs, those stakeholder needs, and ultimately drive toward achieving that vision of diverse, broad, and lasting growth. We've broken our portfolio down into 5 main themes: markets and expansion, startups, recruitment, community development, and rural development. Those themes are taken right from our strategic plan. All of this ties back to our strategic plan. You guys have got the strategic plan in front of you. They're the blue words that broadly, they're the blue words that are highlighted in our strategic plan. Those themes are. Overall, what we want to do here is make a shift toward from a program-driven organization more to a service-driven organization. In markets and expansion, what that means is we want to shift from right now we've got some great programs, but they're kind of ad hoc. We've inherited a lot of them from the federal government. They're not custom built for what Wyoming entrepreneurs and businesses need. And what we want to do to fix that is create an industry-specific cohesive suite of services that leverages federal funds, but that are more impactful to what businesses need in Wyoming. When it comes to startups, we've done some good work in the past, but it's been pretty generic and kind of one size fits all across all types of different startups. We've also measured how we're doing in startups really in a quantitative way. So how many LLCs are being created? How many 5-year-old businesses are there? Those are important, but we think we're now ready to move toward a quality-driven service model. So that's really designed to overcome specific needs, really more purpose-built for what we've heard entrepreneurs need in Wyoming. When it comes to recruitment, we've kind of keep it at a state level. It's pretty broad, our strategy for recruitment is. And what we want to do is focus that on the industries, on our core industries and our new economic sectors, as well as bringing that down to the local level and enabling, empowering communities to own their business recruiting. When it comes to community development, we need focus, and I think this reflects the conversation that you all just had. We need focus. We need programs, people, and services that are focused on providing community amenities that help diversify Wyoming's economy through workforce and business development. When it comes to rural development, you know, we serve rural communities in the same way that we serve communities that are less rural in Wyoming currently. And that creates some unintentional disadvantages for rural communities. And so what we want to do there is identify what are the gaps that rural communities are missing and how do we need to fill them. And we need to create a set of tools that does that for them. Specifically, these are the programs and services that make up that portfolio. I've highlighted the new programs and services. They're bold and in orange, and I'm going to focus mainly on those. But do know that there's other stuff in here, but I'm going to really focus on the real change maker value-added services. Markets and expansion. Currently, many of you are familiar with the State Trade and Expansion Program. It's a federal program. We call it STEP. That has been really useful to some companies in Wyoming, but it doesn't serve everyone in Wyoming. It only serves really a fraction of the businesses in Wyoming. So what we want to do there is create kind of a mirror program to STEP that provides more flexibility and is custom built for what businesses in Wyoming need. We also know that we need a state branded program that benefits focus industries. In order to diversify our economy, we know that we need Made in Wyoming or another state branded program that benefits our core industries as well as our new sectors. We've seen great success in the Taiwan Trade Office, and we want to throw fuel on that fire. We want to continue the Taiwan Trade Office, and we want to look at expanding our international presence in more prospective markets. This one's really important. We want to be able to have the capacity and the funding to work with industries on initiatives that are led by them. When we hear that there's a need from industry, we need to be able to respond quickly and do the things that are going to make the change for their industry in Wyoming. And so that's included in a big way in this portfolio. With startups, it's really all about building on young programs to better serve our entrepreneurs. We've developed Kickstart and other programs over the past year, and we're continuing to make those better. As you know, we kind of launched them in beta, and we want to improve upon those. We want to improve upon those by kind of developing more of a continuum of capital for startups. So instead of just Kickstart, we want to help incentivize local and partner efforts for regional startup challenges. There's a lot of great stuff happening around the state, and we want to support those efforts and try to grow those in other places in the state. We also want to make sure that we are reaching out to investors and holding events to attract investors from outside the state and within the state, so that those Kickstart companies and other startups have the opportunity to grow on the success that they've found and raise funds from angel investors, VC, etc. We also have loan programs that we know are underutilized. And Josh is leading this. We're looking at how can we improve those loan programs so that they're really useful to the businesses that could use them. In recruitment, some super exciting stuff here. First, Brandon and Wendy want to focus their recruiting efforts on the focus industries that we've got in our strategic plan, so creating alignment there, as well as developing a community and regional business recruiting program. This is a really cool model that's been successful in other states. What it is it provides the tools, the marketing, the branding at the state level, but allows regions and communities to own their own leads, to develop their own relationships when it comes to business recruiting. They also want to look at recruiting in startups and technology companies, kind of getting those startups, leveraging the tools that we're developing in that startups category, getting those startups to start their companies here and kind of grow them in Wyoming. In community development, it's all about focusing programs on attracting workforce and therefore diversifying Wyoming's economy. This is really focused on programs outside of BRC, but I think it has a lot of overlap with BRC. The first thing that we want to do in community development is understand what are the amenities that attract the workforce in our focus sectors. And then we need to focus all of our programs on attracting that workforce so that we have a direct tie from our community development efforts into our business developments and ultimately into our vision of creating a diverse, broad, and lasting economy. We also, this is exciting, we want to empower regions and communities to develop comprehensive economic development strategies. We have reached out to the EDA and they are willing to partner with us on funding for these SEDS, in communities and regions. That has multiple benefits. It allows communities to better understand their strengths and know kind of how to where to drive their economy, as well as those SEDS are required to get EDA funding for a lot of programs, and so it helps us to better leverage federal funding throughout the state as well. Sean alluded to this, and this is still early, but we want to enhance our partnerships with tourism and the Department of Workforce Services to promote quality of life in a way that attracts and retains workforce. That's a huge strength that we've got in Wyoming, and we've got to work together with those agencies to work to attract workforce. Rural development is something where we, the first step here is to really get out into rural communities and say, what do you need? What do you need from us? Where are our programs that kind of suit the state overall? Where are they falling short? And what gaps do we need to fill? So we need to create a comprehensive suite of tools for those communities that overcome the specific needs that they have. So that's a lot of things to add. And in order to really focus on what we're doing with our new strategic plan, we knew that we needed to find efficiencies elsewhere, to focus resources, to focus time. So what we are thinking of shifting away from are CDBG. Those programs are federal programs, but they're really low dollar amounts, and they require a lot of personnel resources. And so in order to shift some of those resources to the programs and services that we think are going to add more value, we'd like to shift away from those. We'd also like to shift away from the farmers market promotional grant, loan guarantee, as well as the energy services, which actually will just be shifted over to the Wyoming Energy Authority next year. That's not all of the things that we're finding efficiencies in. Within programs that we want to keep, like Made in Wyoming, Grown in Wyoming, Kickstart, Export Assistance, Recruiting, we are finding significant efficiencies within those programs. So we know we need to find resources within our current budget, find time within our current personnel to create these new programs. And this is how we think we can do that. The whole reason we are doing this is to create value for stakeholders, and this portfolio does that. Oh, it's in a different order. We switched it earlier today.
So just quick housekeeping, and I told some of you at break, these were printed yesterday and we made slight tweaks this morning. So all the slides are there, there's just some have been shifted.
Right. But there's a prize for actually paying attention.
Yeah,
to
right,
that,
right. There you go. There you go. Exactly. So like I was saying, there is awesome value for stakeholders within this portfolio. If you look at our strategic plan, who we serve is highlighted in that blue box at the bottom of the one pager. We serve industry, businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups and communities. For industry, they get expertise and funding to accomplish the initiatives that they know are important with this portfolio. They also get community development that helps them attract the workforce that they need. Businesses get more hands-on service, they get better access to foreign markets and tools for exporting, and they get a meaningful Wyoming brand that can help them add value in their marketing efforts. For entrepreneurs and startups, we want to provide a lot more personalized services and resources, a lot more hands-on services. Access to more sources of capital is huge for entrepreneurs and startups, and that's what they've been asking for. And in addition to that, we want to provide more business coaching, especially in those areas that aren't currently served. Western Wyoming is one of those areas right now. Communities have a lot to gain from this portfolio as well. They get to own their business recruiting leads, which is really exciting. They also have opportunities for federal funding to help them plan and develop their communities, as well as clearer guidelines for programs and more accessibility for small towns. So that's where stakeholders aim, kind of stand to gain from this portfolio. At the state level, this is what we hope to do with this portfolio. Like I said, there's a lot of things that influence these outcomes, but this is what we think that this portfolio can do. We think it can double the number of companies exporting domestically and internationally. Currently, STEP focuses on international exports, and we think there are a lot of companies in Wyoming who are maybe not ready for international exports, or maybe that's not the right fit, but domestic exports is something that could really help them expand and grow their markets. And so by creating that kind of mirror STEP program with more flexibility to do that, we think we can really impact the number of companies that are exporting in Wyoming. We also think that we can increase business expansion projects by about 150%, leveraging that Made in Wyoming program, as well as the rest of the market development tools that we've proposed. We want to improve on the ratio of follow-on capital to Kickstart award funding. Currently, we're still getting reports rolling in, so don't quote me on these metrics yet, but currently for every dollar in Kickstart funding awarded to a startup, they raise about $2.50 to $3 of follow-on capital across the portfolio. So that's focused in a few companies, but we've got a pretty decent ratio of follow-on capital to Kickstart funding currently. We think we can increase that by increasing opportunities for those companies to pitch to investors and for giving them more help in developing their businesses. By focusing recruiting on those underrepresented sectors, those new economic sectors, those tend to all have a higher median income. And so by doing that, we think that we can increase median income by about $5,000 a year. We also know that this portfolio can help fill specific gaps for rural communities. And this is really relevant to the conversation that you all just had. We want 100% of community development projects to have a quantifiable effect on workforce. So we want to use that. We want to use that study, that livability study that we plan to create, to help us understand what are the specific amenities that workforce needs, and we want to implement that. All of these possible outcomes drive toward creating diverse, broad, and lasting growth, and ultimately achieving the mission that you all adopted in May.
Hey, Sarah, can I just say, blow this slide up, hang it everywhere, and you're done. I mean, not really, but I mean, that's amazing.
$5,000 a year increase in median income is a huge goal.
It is. Yep, it's a big goal. We currently, just for context, our median income in Wyoming is higher than the national average. We have higher wages in Wyoming currently. The national average is in the 50s somewhere, kind of high 50s, 55, 56. So that's a 10% increase on the national average. We're in the low 60s, so it's a little bit less than 10%.
So Sarah, do you have a timeline for this? When is the measurement going to be effective?
These apply to the next biennium. So these relate specifically to the budget that Amy will talk about in a minute.
Okay. All right.
These are all, they look big, but we think that they're all, really logical. They're all supported by good logic models. Like I said, there's a lot of other effects that can affect these outcomes, no matter how hard we work. So I will caveat those with that, but we think these are attainable. It's a powerful portfolio that we've put together.
So following up on that, so this is a 2-year goal. So if it's 10%, you're talking about 5% per year in terms of the median income. So just to add to this then, are you going to expand these metrics in terms of a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year? Because a 5% annual growth rate may not be sustainable over a 10-year period.
Right, absolutely. We have not done that yet, but we can certainly look at doing that.
Thank you.
All right. We have some proof of concept for the portfolio that I just proposed. We've started working on a lot of these programs already. Kickstart, obviously, the startup portfolio has been developing over the last year. And like we said, we've got a pretty good ratio of follow-on capital to Kickstart funds. just the story of DISA, that's those two guys on the left there. They're UW graduates. They've got law degrees, MBAs. They could have done anything, and they chose to instead start a company in Casper, Wyoming after they graduated from UW. They closed a big funding round this year, and they're a big contributor to that ratio. And we're really proud to say that we've been able to help them accomplish that. For the Taiwan Foreign Trade Office has been really successful in its really early days. Wyoming Beef is in 2 hotels in Taiwan and continuing to grow. Community reviews have recently been renewed. We're doing them again. We did them years ago, and communities, including Wright, have already seen benefits from those. So we've got some traction. We want to build on the early successes that we've seen by building out the portfolio that I just proposed. In order to do that, we're going to need to look at our organization and people, and I will hand it over to Hava for that.
Nice job, Sarah. Thank you. So Sarah has put together a pretty powerful portfolio, and the way to do that is through our people and our organization. So to move, as she mentioned a number of times in her presentation, to move from a program-driven organization to a service-driven organization that focuses on the industry and specializes on one-on-one assistance, becomes experts, educates, spending more time with our clients, educating and helping them thrive. We need to do some more for ourselves. So Sarah started off the presentation talking about who we are, where we've come from, what we've done. And she's absolutely right. We have people who've worked for Fortune 500s. They've worked for nonprofits. They've worked for local governments, financial sector, on and on and on. Not just that, we have experience in business recruitment and finance, grant management, all of these fantastic things. And even above and beyond that, we're achievers. We are idea creators. We are relators. We are adaptable. We want to make this happen. We're hungry and we're going to make this happen. But in order to do that, we have some things that we have to do first. We have some gaps. We acknowledge that we've got specific gaps in agribusiness, international trade, those specific expertise areas. So we need to, so how we're going to go about filling these gaps are, I would split it in 2 different ways. So I'm looking at it internally, building up the team, and then externally, what do we do with those that we're connected with on the outside? So internally, we're going to focus first on education. So that is building up our own skill sets, building up our own understanding, industry knowledge, core sectors, working on ourselves first. Then going off and hiring, bringing in some of that expertise that we need immediately on the ground right now that we just don't have, and we can't, it would take too long to build up. Then looking outside, then we work tightly with consultants who will help us drive industry initiatives, get those things moving quickly, and then also better leveraging our partners. So the Business Resource Network, local economic developers, industry experts, business experts, et cetera.
So given all of that and given the conversation around portfolio and people, let's shift to budget and why we're here. So again, the biennium budget timeline, the biennium is the 21-22 biennium. It starts July 1st, 2020, and it ends June 30th, 2022. And so our biennium budget process is in play right now as we're planning for the future. So I want to provide some foundational budget pieces for you to kind of chew on as we continue this discussion. So the first is talking a little bit about endow. So in 2018, there were a number of legislative actions that were taken that impacted the 19-20 biennium, which is the biennium that we're in right now, that injected $23.75 million into economic diversification. I want to show this graph that shows the Wyoming Business Council, which our standard budget is $64 million. 60% of that $64 million is directly tied to our Business Ready Community Program. And that's our BRC program. That's the conversation that we just had right before this one. And then of course that Endow piece. And so this is a holistic view of what's happening in economic development in Wyoming right now, and how economic development is being funded ultimately, and what's been the catalyst around some of the activities that we're doing at the Business Council. So the Business Council was given a number of new responsibilities via that Endow legislation. The budgets for Endow were one time. They are cumbersome to access. And what's happened, and Sarah actually just talked about it a little bit, is a number of the programs via Endow have turned into proof of concept programs for us. So Kickstart is an excellent example of a program that really came from an Endow legislation, but has been more of a proof to concept for us that we feel is an excellent investment in our future. So what we've learned with Endow, and what we are hoping to do moving forward with some of the lessons learned from Endow, is that we feel that we're ready to operationalize some of those programs and services that came from that Endow legislation, and operationalize those within the Business Council and within our budgets. So that's one piece of food for thought to keep in mind. Just really quickly, that smaller graph to the left, that actually is a breakdown of what that Endow funding looked like, and what specific initiatives and how much money was attached to those initiatives. So now let's shift, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Wyoming Business Council budget. So as I just mentioned, the BRC budget is approximately 60% of our standard budget for the Wyoming Business Council. So that's what you're seeing on the pie chart on your left. So you can see BRC. The rest, the other 40%, is our internal operations, payroll, and delivery. The way the current budget structure works right now, and this gets into a little bit of the weeds, but it's important for you to understand, there are two different funds that make up our standard budget. There's the BRC fund, and then what's referred to as that WBC fund, or that, and again, that includes the three things that you see there. As we've looked at our portfolio, and as we look at where we want to go, we feel it's very important from a transparency and accountability and a focus standpoint to recommend that we create a third budget fund as part of our standard budget. That third budget fund would serve the purpose of giving us that, again, that transparency and that focus and that clarity, specifically around the economic diversification programs and services, and ultimately that portfolio that we've been discussing. So what we would like to do is truly put internal operations and payroll into a separate bucket, for lack of a different term, programs and services into a second one, and then of course the BRC fund. We feel like this is the correct structure, and again, really focusing on that transparency and focus piece. The other thing that this allows us to do by creating this third fund is having a program and services fund where we're focused specifically on that delivery to our stakeholders, will allow us to also put very direct metrics to that fund to make sure that we are tracking our success. Going back to the portfolio conversation that we've had, just wanted to throw this up there. So, Sarah laid out 5 different areas that we feel our investments are very important. I don't want everybody to get too hung up on the size of the pieces of the pies in this chart. And I want to point out a couple of things. In today's world, markets and expansion and recruitment make up what we call today our business development activities. And then we have community development as part of our activities today as well. So that's why you're seeing those as those 2 bigger chunks, because they encompass a lot. But you'll notice one of the changes that we've made is that recruitment becomes its own slice of the pie. Recruitment's very, very important. And I know it looks smaller in comparison to something like markets and expansion, but actually this pie chart represents an increase into our investment into recruitment from what we're doing today. You'll notice rural development. Rural development is not part of our pie in today's world specifically. It's very, very important that it becomes its own slice. Startups is probably the biggest change. And again, that's part of, some of the Endow Catalyst and some of the lessons that we've learned, and also the importance that we see in startups in Wyoming. And we really feel like this portfolio is the right mix to move Wyoming forward and to build it into the state that we all know it can be. So we're excited about this portfolio. And again, just one more piece as we get into some of this. So this slide may look simple, but this is where I think the bulk of your discussion will come today. And there's a lot here and a lot for us to consider. So I want to point out a couple of things. You see a red line that runs across that chart. That red line indicates our existing standard budget. And the way biennium budgets work is that we operate off of a biennium budget unless there were significant changes or unless there was some sort of emergency that happened. That standard budget tends to repeat from biennium to biennium. And so that red line that you're seeing is our existing standard budget, and it was very similar, if not the same, as the standard budget for the previous biennium and the one prior to that as well. As I reflect on this slide and as I reflect on our portfolio, I feel like the term portfolio actually plays two different definitions in our conversation. Portfolio relates back to, of course, our markets, our expansion, recruitment, startup, to that, but I also feel like portfolio relates to our investments. And I see our investments in our portfolio similar to how you may see your retirement account or how you would see a personal stock account that you have. And in order for us to increase our rate of return in a retirement account, there's two ways usually to do that. You can put more money in, or you can adjust your allocations to hopefully maximize that rate of return. So I feel like that's what we're considering right now, is as we look at the mix of our portfolio, as of all our different investments that we have, if we look at that mix, we need to determine, do we have the right mix for our investments? Do we need to be putting all our dollars in different places to maximize that rate of return? Or do we need to put more money in to maximize that return? And so I think that's something we need to think of it in terms as, in order for us to deliver a net zero standard budget request, that would require us to make some shifts, that we would have to make some adjustments in our current portfolio. And so given that we only have 3 places to choose where to make those adjustments, if we want to increase the green square, which is our programs and services, we have to decrease someplace else or adjust someplace else. That is if we're trying to do a net zero standard budget request. The other option would be to keep that green square, and again, those are our programs and services, and where we feel like we need to double down and put more money and effort and focus in to further diversify our economy, then we can keep the red the same as it is today, which is the BRC program, but it will result in an increase to the standard budget. So just want to, like I said, I think this slide will be the slide that we'll want to come back to, and I think this will be the catalyst for our conversation today. I just want to leave you with some final words, and I'll go back to that slide during the conversation. But just, again, we talked about the general theme of passion and love for our state that we all share. And, I mentioned how optimistic I feel. And I feel like that we're the right team. It's the right time. we have the right plan, we're ready for it. We're up for the challenge. We can do this. We have no doubt we can do this. And so I hope you feel the same way about the level of optimism that I'm feeling. And I look forward to a year from now as we're reflecting on this conversation and what we've done in that year, and even what we've done at the end of the biennium. So thank you.
Wow. You
Thank
got
you.
my vote.
Yes.
I have a question. Could you go back to the budget slide?
Yeah. The very meaty budget slide.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the programs and services, are there any staff salaries in there?
Not in programs and services, no. Those would be reflected in the orange, that bottom square in that chart, the internal operations.
Okay.
Mhm.
Which, oh, I'm sorry.
Go
Oh,
for
that
it.
was totally not kosher. But you guys might want to point out to everybody that we do have, so that it looks like there's 2% increase, but we also have positions that are not filled right now. So we're not necessarily spending all of our salary dollars today, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So this is an increase, but it also accounts for filling positions that we have.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Zone.
And filling positions not as they were originally intended, but to meet.
To meet our new world. Yeah. Yes.
Correct. These would be newly created positions to meet the expertise that we need.
We
Not
currently-
brand new head count, but redefining the job descriptions.
So if everyone is comfortable with what these ladies walk through, really what we're talking about is, do we want to ask for more? Or do we want to do it with what we already have, right?
And is the allocation? And do we agree with the allocation?
Right. Correct. Ron?
Madam Chair, what, thinking about endow, of that, let's say option number 2, how much of that includes endow?
There are no endow funds reflected
No
there.
endow funds?
No.
Okay, so that's, we still have to deal with that through the governor's office.
So what option 1 and option 2 both reflect is we would be self-funding the programs that were previously funded by Endow. So that includes Kickstart, that was previously funded through the diversification fund. Now, in option 1 and option 2, we have included budget to fund Kickstart and other startup services, as well as some of the market development pieces that were funded through Senate File 108.
It's now funded by the governor's office.
Currently, yes. And in our proposal for 21-22, it would be funded through the Business Council.
But not broadband, correct?
N-
10 million?
Broadband, we have not proposed any changes to.
Madam Chair, and maybe this is a Hava question. As part of this budget, on either one of those alternatives, it sounds like we're planning on filling the 8 unfilled positions, but with not necessarily the same skill set. Have I got that right?
Correct.
What about during the budget discussions that we had collectively, we also had the discussion relative to bringing up, I think we were at 85% of the workforce percentage in terms of wage. Is that part of this discussion? And if so, how much and how does that fill the slots there?
Madam Co-Chair, Mr. Bland, there is internal adjustments that are considered within this plan that's reflected up here. An exact, so for example, you're speaking of the 82%. It's not a calculation of specifically moving people to like 90%, for example. It would be more of what would be equitable based upon the new positions that we need to hire for.
Follow up. So I think what you just said is that it's not allocated specifically to individuals, but there's a pool from the 82 to some higher number, whatever that might land at. Is that correct?
That's a good way of comparing it. Yes, correct. It would
What
be,
might that number be?
I believe, Amy, help me out here. So option 2, so we're looking at most $1 million.
Spread over, I'm
A
trying to get to a
biennium,
percentage.
a biennium, 2 years. And that accounts for salaries and benefits.
Sure. And what do our benefits come in at? 30, 40%? I mean, how are we looking at that?
They're approximately 40%.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we just one follow-up here, and obviously there's a broader strategy, and we've got a schedule to meet with respect to the budget expectation with the governor first, and then the legislature, et cetera, et cetera. I guess strategically, one way of looking at that is you kind of leave a little fat in here to kind of move the ball forward and then anticipate based on previous experience what may end up landing somewhere. Is that fair to say without getting specific?
Well, first, I want to let everybody know that we're probably going to move the regional update, the field operations update till tomorrow, so we can continue to use this time this afternoon to discuss this. Secondly, I'll defer to Sean, but I want everybody to recognize this is the first time the board has ever engaged in a public, in any review, let alone a public review of our budget. And the reason is because we have taken such an interest in revamping how we are requesting funds to tie them to our strategy and a portfolio. So historically, it's been what the legislature gives us is what we work with.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Bland, so what I see in any of these options, there are a lot of variables, and each one of those variables could be adjusted while still maintaining a new focus and transparency and accountability. We are with options, well, I'd say primarily with well, I guess all of them, options 1 and 2, we are providing an opportunity to wean ourselves from the endow funds. So any of those endow funds that aren't used, say then that becomes the governor's discretion as to what he wants to do with those. We're telling the governor and legislature, we've figured out how to internally operationalize what you've told us to do. We've done it within our own means. We don't need these other buckets of money. We've also then given both you, the governor and legislature, here are the different places where you can slide the levers. To Kelly's point, is that allocation, are those percentages the right ones? Can they be increased or decreased? But what we see, what we're doing here, what we're recommending in option 1, in reallocating our existing funds, this is what the legislature tends to do on a regular basis, but on an ad hoc basis, based on individual constituents. What Governor Gordon is telling the legislature, saying, you can't rob money out of a program with an earmark. These budgets are set 2 years in advance, and there's a process that you follow. What we're saying here is we understand what the legislature's frustration has been. They want to see these different types of activities, but we don't think that's the best way to budget, to make these line items within the business ready community. We're going to put together a plan to say, here's how we can accomplish these larger activities. So I think what I would imagine is whatever option we go with, it's probably not going to be exactly the same. I think it can be tinkered with in a different ways, either by the governor or legislature. But I think the integrity of the budget is solid regardless of what is adjusted. Clearer, more focused, more transparent, higher level of accountability.
Other comments, Aaron? Did you, no? Oh. No? Aaron,
Me?
yes. Do you have
That's
a
not even
comment?
polite. I just had a question.
Oh, Cindy.
Certainly, please.
Whoa, that's that can be dangerous in that if we don't hit those budgeted marks or those goals,
Mhm.
they could say, well, you didn't hit your goals, so now we're gonna. I'm confident that you're going to get the job done. So I guess that's not too outside the box.
Right. Madam Chairman, Ms. Johnson, there was a slide in some of the other presentations that we put together. This is a circular process. We don't know exactly if we're going to hit these marks. We're going to be building programs. We're not building everything right now for you. A lot of this, it's going to depend on what the industry says they need. It's going to depend on what the actual budget is. So we can't anticipate precisely what are going to be those metrics, but we'll have metrics, we'll measure them, and we'll evaluate. How far off are we? Or can we make adjustments? Or is this unachievable and we have to regroup and go a different direction? It's a circular process. We set our goals, put our services in place, we measure, we evaluate, and we adjust.
And historically, we've done that after we've known what we were allotted.
Madam, sorry, Kelly. Just out of curiosity's sake, not this past biennium where we are now, I can't remember when we saw the major cuts to the budget. Was it 2 bienniums ago? What was our VRC fund at that point? What's the difference?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Sopko, if you look at page 7.
That's really small print, Sean.
Of this annual report, you can see where the dark red is our operations, what we do. The lighter shade, that is, for the most part, business-ready communities. At one point, we had another program that we've since discontinued called Community Facilities. You can see in 15, 16, that's when the cuts started going into effect. So we've had a pretty significant drop from 15, 16 to the next biennium, 17, 18. Right now, our budget, our current biennial budget is comparable to what it was in 2005, 2006. And then for another point of reference, that red line is our head count.
Another interesting observation to look at, if you look at slide 3 from the deck, that 15-16 timeframe is the same timeframe you see oil prices drop, coal prices drop, production drop, of course.
Okay, hold on. I know that Mike's got a question. Oh, Kelly first.
So the first one is, in terms of process, what do you want us to give you today? And do you want us to talk about the allocation? Do you want us to talk about which option? What is your expectation from the board? Remembering that this is the first public process for the first budget that we've been involved with in this public process. So that's the first question.
Okay. So our biennium budget submission is due September 30th. So we really would like an indication from the board via this discussion of, are we comfortable with a net zero submission, or are we looking for an increase in our standard budget? That's ultimately where we're at. I think there are some additional tweaks that can happen once we make that decision. The other piece I want to point out, though, is that we, as mentioned many times, we've not typically made the budget process a public process. We want it to be even more public beyond this meeting. And so what we plan to do is take an excerpt of this presentation today, because these meetings are recorded. So we'll actually cut and have this portion of the presentation on our website. And we will solicit public feedback maybe as early as tomorrow. So we will actually take open feedback for the next week on what we're looking at, to make sure that we are looking at all options and hearing what the public has to say as well.
So thank you for that. So since I'm so bashful, I would hesitate,
Can you speak into the microphone?
I would hesitate to, in presenting the budget, cut BRC by as much as 60 to 45%. If I'm reading that right, that's what it says. If I think it's a love program, I think it's a great program, I think it's done a lot of good. I know that because it's such a big chunk of the budget, it does have a target, or it is a target, but I do believe that that has done a lot of good for the state and for communities. So I'm not in support of changing that allocation by that amount. And what amount, I'm not going to get into that, but I'm nervous about that. I'm also, in terms of the budget for personnel, which kind of was a follow-on to Jerry's question, I'm not sure how the 8 unfilled positions currently fit into this budget, and whether we can accomplish it with 6 or with 5 or with 4, and what that looks like relative to getting the current personnel to a retention level that you need to have them at to accomplish the goals. It's a little bit like my question I asked on the tour today. It's important to have the personnel that you need to accomplish the goals, and without seeing the line by line budget numbers, which I don't have an expectation, nor do I really want to do that. I would be pretty clear when you, which I know you will be, when you put this budget forth, because the legislature will go through that with a fine-tooth comb, that you feel very comfortable with that. I would want, if I were giving you advice here, which I guess as a board member I am, is be very capable of defending that part of the budget, and at the same point, or at the same time, be very comfortable defending BRC, because that's the one that is going to have some scrutiny. So those are my 2 specific comments.
Okay, hold on. Aaron, did you have a comment?
No.
Somebody. Okay, Kim?
So if I understand, first let's talk about the 8 bodies filled. I view that more as 8. I view that as the dollars. So it doesn't necessarily, if I understand it properly, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to hire 8 people, but we are going to spend that money. It might be 5 people. And it elevates, or multiple areas. I mean, we have to fill that need. The people that use our services want expertise. And ag is a perfect example. We aren't going to get anybody to move out of the private sector, and you need expertise. We can't grow you cannot grow an ag person internally. You need, if we really want to add value, we're going to have to get somebody that's in the industry, experienced and good. They're not going to move for what we normally maybe would have paid them. So maybe instead of hiring 8 people, we are hiring 6, but 2 of those people, we're going to get the expertise that we need. So is it safe for us to say, when we're asking for this increase in the budget, it doesn't necessarily mean, we're not talking FTE. We're talking spending those dollars so we can get the expertise either within our existing staff or externally to fill that need. Is that?
That's correct, Kim. That's a good way to lay it out. There are a number of options that we laid out in our earlier workshops with each of you. And, one of them did talk about it as FTE, a number of new bodies. But in essence, what we have done and will continue to do is use those dollars for the expertise that we need. And that is something that continues to evolve at each moment, each phase.
The other thing to mention too, as far as expertise, is we do have another choice with expertise. It doesn't always have to be an employee as well, but it would be an increase in our budgets because of the 900 series and using consultants or contractors, depending on what that expertise was needed and what the time frame was that we thought we needed that expertise for.
Okay. So related to the allocation and the BRC piece, is it safe for us to also assume we're requesting, and we probably will by the time we get to legislative session, changes. Assuming some of those changes are related to BRC, we may not have to shift as much out of that BRC budget potentially. And I'll give a good example, a real life example, aerospace and engineering. So there's an awesome initiative, and it's across, there's 9 private companies in 4 or 5 different cities. I think 5.
And I
in
think
the
now
state.
10 companies.
10 now. So we're probably at 6. Either way, these guys all came together and they're willing to ante up their money, and they want us to ante up some of our money, and they want to go out and help diversify their businesses and therefore this state by getting contracts with not directly the government, but government providers. So they come to us and they ask for $250,000. It doesn't fit in BRC. We can't do it because BRC is infrastructure driven. So we struggle back and forth. And what do? They go to their legislator and they try to earmark it. Doesn't work. Governor vetoes it. And I'm not telling anybody that is anything that's not already public. Governor vetoes it, but he comes back to us and says, get it done. So that's an example of the new green bucket that doesn't exist today, because that's a contract, or that's a piece that we would have a mechanism to fund that we would normally be funding out of BRC. So that's in my mind, if we don't get any legislative change, which you never know, we can't control that, but our job is to do something. So if we don't get any legislative change, that solves that issue. And that serves those 10 companies that want to expand and diversify and hire more people in our state. So I don't know if that answers a little bit of the BRC shift. In my mind, that's what justifies that.
Kathy, you had your hand up. Did you have a comment? No.
It was before this discussion, so if this discussion wants to continue, go ahead. I just have a question, a point of clarification for myself, really. The endow funds, of course, stay with endow or whatever happens with them. But how many additional programs with endow are we taking on that we didn't have before? Is that a fair question?
It is.
Yeah, I can answer that. All of the work that we're doing with startups, with the exception of some of the funding through the BRN contract with UW, is funded by endow funds. In addition to that, a lot of the work that's being done in market development, including the Taiwan Trade Office and other efforts, is being funded through endow funds as well. And of course, broadband's got some endow funds associated with it as well.
Okay, let's see. Cindy, you looked like you wanted to say something.
I always want to say something, but I'm sorry.
So just so everybody knows, it's 4:35. I don't mean to, I know this is a very important discussion.
It's too important to, it's really important that we understand. So we want $70 million. Okay. That's okay. We need $70 million. Do we have some charts that will say to our legislators and our senators, by giving us this, you know, here's the dollar amount. We're asking for 70, but if you spend that, we hope to generate 150%, which is X. And of that money, of the 52% that's going to go to BRC projects, and I've seen a lot of them are investing in industrial parks. Well, the cities become landlords then. They're going to get money from the people who are in those parks. Are we going to get a return on that investment? And how much is that return? And can we fund more of those 30%? Can we make it 40%? Are we going to get maybe 10% back? I like to see those numbers.
Madam Chairman, Mrs. Johnson, I'm going to have Amy answer the first one, but I'm going to take a crack at the second one, or at least give my observations on the BRC. Because what you are bringing up are issues of sustainability at the local level, but also at the program level. I feel that if you decide to move money from BRC to these other activities, and that's one of your possible decision points, is this clear diversification bucket. I believe that what the Business Council and our partners are going to have to say is we're decreasing funding in BRC, which is going to increase the need for sustainability. How are you going to do that? Which goes back to the conversation with Julie. And I think when we chunk out those themes of sustainability, we'll give you, what we hear, we'll hear what WIDA has to say. Here's what you could do within rule or statute. But that sustainability issue, I'm not going to answer it, but it is a real thing that I think we need to be prepared for.
Just the idea of a portfolio and investment. And Kelly, you had mentioned that maybe we should be getting some of this money back. So I'm quickly adding numbers in my head and going, oh, so now are we quasi landlords or the cities that we give the money to?
We are today.
Yeah, like today, I'm sure Weatherby's paying to live on that land, right?
Oh, yes.
So when they pay that to the city and the community, do we get some of that back?
Madam Chairman, Ms. Johnson, this goes to a question or to an observation that I think Mr. Lockhart made earlier on. Revenue recapture is a much bigger discussion. With the Weatherby project, we're getting 50% of the net proceeds back. But by rule, the minimum for projects that generate revenue is 25% comes back to the Business Council.
Madam Co-Chair, Ms. Johnson, just really quick, you asked about if we make this investment, what does the state get in return? And I think that's addressed on that possible outcomes slide that Sarah walked through. And I think the potential is definitely there. Ms. DeVore, I want to go back to something you talked about earlier. So it's interesting to me, if we look at BRC and if we look at the green box, the programs and services box, if you add up the BRC percentage plus the programs and services boxes in each one of those, today we're spending 81% specifically directly funneled to our stakeholders. Stakeholders being communities or industries or businesses. That 81% is not running the Business Council. It's being pushed out throughout the state. And you can do that same thing for options 1 and 2. So option 1, if you add up the 34 and the 45, that's 79. My hunch is there's probably just some rounding things in there that make the difference between the 80 and the 79. It very well could still be 80%. All we did was change how we were funneling those services or that money or those investments into the state. We weren't doing it in option 1 via the BRC program. We're doing it in other ways. Option 2, same thing. So I want to point that out a little bit, that I don't think our service to our stakeholders we're still servicing our stakeholders with any of these options, and we're still funneling services and investment and money outside of the Business Council to where it needs to be. we're just changing how we're doing it. And I think that's what Ms. DeVore was speaking to earlier.
Mike?
So just a few questions. So option one pretty much represents business as usual. Is that?
Actually, the today does. Option one would be,
Yeah,
yes.
sorry,
yep,
yeah. So
yes,
today represents business as usual.
yes.
So in order to fund the strategy program that you've put together, option one basically funds that strategy.
Option one basically funds that strategy,
Right.
yes.
And then
Yes.
in order to not have a budget increase to fund the strategy, then the BRC program gets reduced.
Correct, yes. To fund the strategy means that larger green box.
Right. So the question that I think we're really asking is, do we want the new strategy that we've come up with or not? And if we do, then option one is the way to fund that, because I don't think any of us want to go to the legislature and ask for a 16% increase in our budget. To me, that seems like that's the question in front of the board. And then I think the other part of that is we just can't, as a board, decide to move BRC funds, can we?
No, that would have to be via our budget request and legislatively, yes.
So that's not the board's decision to be able to do that.
No, but we would like to know what the board's thoughts are.
But
If
I mean,
we should go that direction,
but
yes.
no matter, the legislature has to change
Correct,
some
yes.
legislation in order to affect this change.
Yes.
Any other, I've got a thought. Any other comments before?
I think we need to decide what we're going to do if we're going to get more assertive. It's really back to the legislature. Put your money where your mouth is. We're worried about our economy. We're worried about it being more diverse. Give us some horsepower to make some changes. I know we're going to have some deliverables and show that we can do it. And it may not happen in one biennium. It might take another one or more. It may take a period of more, but we're going to have to, I think, get more assertive and just put our case forward. If this is what you want, or do you want to just do it like we've always done it in Wyoming, which is rely on the ups and downs of commodities and everything else? I think that's the age-old problem that we face. I think as a board, we really have to sell a different kind of mindset. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
So any other thoughts?
Madam Chair, just one more. I guess the other thing I just wanted to state is there also is a ramp up too, because you can't instantly implement all this stuff that you're doing and be at option one just because of resources and whatnot. So there is a ramp up that is involved with this. So you won't get all the stuff all the goals that have been projected. That's not going to happen in the 2 years, because you're going to spend 6 months or whatever ramping up to do all that stuff, I think.
And we hope to do that ramp up before this biennium budget goes into effect. So we'll know whether we get that biennium budget in early spring of next year, and then we'll have until July until that budget kicks in. So we won't be finished ramping up in that period of time, but we'll kind of have a head start on the budget.
So in interest of moving this discussion, if you'd like to, I'm gonna go in with Mike and I'm gonna move that we shoot for option one. I'm not real keen on asking for an increase when we're actually proposing a complete change in strategy. We have no history, we have no performance. I don't think that's in our best interest, personal opinion. So I would move that option one is in our best interest going forward. And we should hope that the legislature agrees with us.
Okay, so there's some discussion. Ron, I'll grab your comment in just a second. I would like to propose that because we have not had the ability yet to obtain public feedback, that our staff present if this motion were to pass, that it be contingent upon receiving public feedback, particularly on the BRC allocation of it, and that this board consider authorizing the Personnel Budget and Audit Committee to review that feedback and to make any adjustments before September 30th as necessary.
I would amend my motion to include everything you just said.
Poor Warren.
And I'll accept it. It's a friendly.
Ron, did you have comment?
Yeah, I just needed to ask a question. In option 1 and 2 are today, is there any Kickstart money or Endow money incorporated in?
Yes.
So there is
I mean,
budget
not-
incorporated in the green box to fund Kickstart SBIR.
But
Yes,
we're taking that on as an obligation.
exactly.
So it's new money.
New money to us,
For us, yes.
but not to the state.
So why isn't, I know where the red line is, but why don't we go for option 2? Because it does include a little bit of a bump, quite a bit of a bump for Kickstart and so forth. And it doesn't seem like we could do the same thing with less money.
And just to point out to option 2, and the percentages don't reflect this, and I should have mentioned it to make sure everybody was clear. Option 2 keeps the BRC budget exactly as it is today. So that's the difference. Option 2 funds the new strategy and keeps BRC the same, but it will result in an increase to the standard budget.
Madam Chair. Aaron, hang on really quick. Aaron?
Oh,
Oh, God. Aaron Sopko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I agree with Kim to an extent, but I also agree with Ron. I think that obviously there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done in order to justify the increase. However, when we talk about the new programs and the new efforts, we hamstring ourselves if we don't have the extra money in the budget. I'm also a negotiator, and you can't negotiate up
Right.
from what you ask for. So I think that I would support option 2, contingent upon obviously defining what the goals are, defining what we hope to accomplish with those additional monies and that. But I'm afraid to go for status quo option 1.
Did you have a comment, John?
Maybe a way to compromise through that process is budget 1 is recognizing current services that are provided today and not taking on those pieces from Endow. And budget 2 is maybe acceptable if those pieces from Endow come into play under WBC.
but those Endow funds are not perpetual. I mean, those were one-time funds.
Right.
And the legislators intended that as one-time funds. So those one-time funds are currently allocated and they're in existence, right?
They're
So what-
not unused. They're not just sitting out there waiting to be moved to a different bucket.
Okay, so
Right?
That's correct.
in option 2, are we actually asking them to to fund them again under our programs? Because I don't think we want to go there as a state. I personally don't think the state Endow is in flux. So asking them to fund those items like the startup piece, we're using those funds. And we will go through, I have no idea where we are. There was 5 million total, right?
Yeah, correct.
And we'll have it done
Mm.
by the time we get our new budget.
Correct. Yes.
So broadband would still be there to be used.
Can I make a follow-up comment? I apologize. I guess, and I agree with what you're saying with the Endow, but based on the conversation that we just had, I didn't see that. Maybe it's just the way I was interpreting it as an extension of Endow funds. I saw it as an opportunity that has come about from maybe some of Endow and from experience of the business council and the changing environment within that we're operating in now. And so I don't see it as an extension of Endow funds so much as changing with the times and taking advantage of opportunities that have been identified. Is that?
Right, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, Endow provided the opportunity, and I think Kickstart's probably a really good example. Endow provided the opportunity with those funds for us to see what our startup programs and services could look like. But the funds that were established via Endow for a program like Kickstart will be spent by the end of this biennium. So if we want to continue to invest in startups, we will need additional money. Or reallocate, yes, or reallocate.
Okay, Mike?
Madam Chair, I think what's going to happen is we're going to submit a budget. It's going to go to the governor's office, and he's going to do one of two things. If we submit option one, and he's going to say, no, I really think the BRC needs to be kept where it is, he's going to up it. We submit option two, the governor's office is going to take a look at it and say, we can't have a standard increase in the budget, so we're going to have to decrease it. So what's the political read, Sean, on where the governor's office would land on what kind of budget he's looking for from us?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Easley, let me get my crystal ball out of my bag. The conversations that we have had with the governor and the governor's office are ones in which he is excited to hear us talk about being more service oriented than program driven. We have not shared with him all of these specifics, so I can't tell you precisely how he feels about the portfolio or the percentages, but I do feel that he wants to see changes within the BRC. I think he is interested in the sustainability, not only of the program, but also for the communities. And he has voiced what he does like this. He has been very supportive of this. He's talked about it publicly. He's talked about it to me. He likes this. He likes how we're framing it as moving from a program-driven organization to a service-driven organization. I think he is looking to you all to create some change, not do the same thing over and over, because we are going to get the same results. So I think there is an expectation that this board will come with something different than we've done in the past, and that it is going to be more service-oriented.
I'll add that I think that the co-chair and the governor wants to see something different, wants to see something innovative, but recognizing the constraints that are going to come to all of the agencies that are coming before him, where there's a decrease in resources all over, and certainly while we can have the best discussions with the best intentions that this is where the money needs to be placed in order to really move that needle, that may not be realistic. So we better have a backup plan of how we're going to make and effectuate change to advance this within what we already have. Now, all of that set aside, we have not received public comment yet on what that really looks like. And, if our stakeholders are adamant that the BRC program needs to be where it is, it's going to frame our conversation a little bit differently with the governor about if you want us to deliver what we've put and we've framed as our strategy, then there's no way to match the public comment and desire to keep the BRC the same way with the same amount of funds that we've got. Which is why it was my suggestion that the Personnel, Budget, and Audit Committee really take a look at what those comments are and be able to frame the conversation with staff to the governor that way.
Madam Co-Chair, do we know or can we somewhat deduce the intent of the legislature when they set up the Endow funds and these programs utilizing Kickstart as an example in terms of, okay, are we gonna start this up, have it be successful for 2 years and then let it die?
Madam Chairman, Ms. Moore, it's very difficult to figure out legislative intent. And I would suggest that there's 90 different intentions. But what I'll say is they did two things. They created the funding, the buckets of money, but then they put the words in our statutes. And not only did they say, Business Council, you will do all of this for startups, including Kickstart. They also said wherever in the Business Council statutes, wherever it says the Business Council will do X, Y, and Z for economic development, they changed the language. They added to the language to say, Business Council, you will do X, Y, and Z for economic development and diversification. So we've got this mandate, but it's disassociated from the budgets. And to access the budgets, we have to go through this complicated approval process. So it's hard to say. Did they think this is going to be one time and they'll figure it out? I don't know, because they did give us the responsibilities. The responsibilities are ours, regardless of whether there is endow funding.
Madam Co-Chair.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Kelly ran out of batteries over here. I hear Aaron talking about, you want to start a little negotiation, and that's hence was my question earlier about where to start and what the sense of that process might be. However, we're bringing in a new strategic plan, which is very exciting. I think we've all kind of bought into it, embraced it. We've got a great opportunity here going forward, but to bring it in with an increased budget, 16%, I think is going to be a very, very, very heavy lift. And so with the economic conditions and reality being what it is, I think option one, as presented with the amendments, is a pretty good approach. But I would also add, and I've had an opportunity to talk through the budget process with Amy and Sarah about the story, because it's an exciting story, and that strategic plan is exactly what that is. And I would urge us to really package this in the right way, because I think we can get it done. Sure, would we like to have more money? Of course, but let's prove ourselves first. Yeah. And should I call the question, Madam Chair, with that?
Can I ask one money question that might help us? Julie, recapture funds, those flow into BRC. Can you give me an idea of maybe what percentage of that budget is cash flowing back into our BRC program through recapture right now?
Madam Committee Chair,
Sorry.
Ms. DeVore, no, I don't have that percentage. Maybe Amy, do you remember what it was? It's very small at this point.
Yeah.
Recapture is an animal that's going to take a long time to produce any results, because what we're talking about are lease payments over the life of a building. And we share those recapture funds with the communities. So we're not getting, the whole lease payment back. We're getting a portion of it, 25% in most cases. So we're just not seeing much revenue recapture flowing back into the program. When we did the rule changes 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, we did a lot of modeling on what would it take to make BRC sustainable, and it never modeled out that it would be sustainable on loans or revenue recapture. Yeah. So, it's a piece of the story, but it's not ever going to sustain the program in its entirety.
Oh, no. And I'm just looking for a swag, like 1%. We get
maybe
1%, maybe.
Very small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and remember that recapture was never even a discussion. It wasn't until these charts started changing that recapture became a discussion. And then it became a discussion among what was the balance between the state recapturing and the local community recapturing, because it was supposed to be sustainability for the community, not for the state, not from a programmatic perspective. So it's a can of worms. Did you call the question?
I think I did.
Okay, I think, because we could have this discussion all day, right? And what I think we need to do is call the question on the motion, which is to pursue option 1, subject to the Personnel, Budget, and Audit Committee receiving public public feedback, and then tweaking it as it deems fit to present to the governor. All of the discussion today will be communicated not only to the governor, but also to the legislature. That's what these folks spend January and February doing. So this is a new exercise to just say, based on our new strategy, where are we going? So having said that, let's call the question. And then if the motion, depending on the viability of the motion, we can see what discussions need to happen further. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Okay, Warren, why don't you take a roll call?
All right, members of the board, please give me your vote when I call your name. Mr. Bland.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Coyne.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. DeVore.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Easley.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Getz.
Aye.
Mr. Harvey.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Hoops.
Nay.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Nay.
Thank you. Mr. Kinsey.
Nay.
Thank you. Mr. Lockhart.
Nay.
Thank you. Ms. Moore.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Sopko.
No.
Thank you. Ms. Tomasi.
Nay.
Madam Co-Chair, the motion fails.
Okay, are there any other motions that anyone else would like to make?
Let's try it, shall we? I would like to make a motion that due to the increase in programs that we're going to have, we go with option 2 and we present option 2 as our budget option.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think the states or the cities or the counties are going to like a reduced BRC. I just don't think they're going to want to see that.
Ron, did you second it?
Second.
Okay, so there's a first and a second. Motion is to pursue option 2. Is there a discussion?
I just have one question, Madam Chair. I apologize.
No, go for it, Aaron.
Option 1 that we just voted on, how much, if they come back and say, no, we're sticking with the budget as it is, how much does that change the new strategic plan that this is all based on?
So a simplistic way to look at that, and it's not everything, but a simplistic way would be to look at on slides 8 and 9, those program and services slides, some of the things that are highlighted in the orange and in the bold are the things that would be additional.
Thank you.
I would challenge us that if we really want to put those things in place, we can cut the fat elsewhere. We can do this with our existing budget.
I don't see any fat right now. That's my concern. I understand. I mean, we've had to cut the fat, so to speak, for the last 3 or 4 years, 4 years. And that's where I'm concerned. If the state is serious about getting out of this cycle where we live and die by the extractive minerals industry and that, then there's going to be a point where it's actually raining and we have to invest in other ways to diversify our economy. And I'm not saying that this is like the fix all for everything, but if we keep status quo, we're going to continue to be status quo. And so that's all. I agree. When you look at the percentage, maybe it doesn't have to be that much of an increase, but if we're truly going to try and move this thing forward, then we have to do a combination of trimming the fat where we find it. We have to invest more in those programs that we're talking about in this new strategic plan, because otherwise I just don't see it moving. And that's where we're going to just maintain this cycle that I guess I've only been here for going on 50 years, but it seems like the same cycle for the last 50 years. And I think that it's time that if we're having these conversations, that we have to have a real conversation about what it actually takes to move out of that cycle.
Madam Co-Chair.
Yes.
So my comments on the motion are, I think me personally, reason I voted against the past motion or the prior motion was because of the cut in the BRC. So my compromise would be because I have some heartburn about going to the legislature with a 16% increase in budget. I do. I think that's problematic. I can live with a 10% increase. That's a 5% annual increase. The 6% then would come out of both the programs and the BRC from the 16%. And I think that is a reasonable compromise that says we are changing the allocation. We are asking you for a 5% annual increase, and we have increased our programs and services, and we have decreased BRC, but we think that BRC is an important part. And so in order to have a deliverable to you of the changes in the strategic plan, we're asking you for an increase on that part. And we're willing to, or we think the state should or could look at a decrease in BRC, but not as severe as would be option one. So I could support a compromise to that vein. And that's what I kind of think we ought to be moving toward. Well, that's what I do think we should be moving toward.
Okay, so at this point,
A motion's on the floor, so I understand.
yeah. So at this point, let's go ahead and, does someone want to call the question as to the motion to accept and present option 2?
Question.
Thank you. All those in favor of moving forward with presenting option 2 as is signify by saying aye.
I think they liked his idea.
Yeah, I know. But I heard a little aye somewhere. No?
Mr. Sopko and Ms. Johnson.
Stand up, Alan.
All those who are not in favor of pursuing option 2 signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Warren, why don't you call the question? Or excuse me, why don't you take roll call?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Bland.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Coyne.
No.
Thank you. Ms. DeVore.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Easley.
No.
Thank you. Ms. Getz.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Harvey.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Hoops.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Lockhart.
No.
Ms. Moore. Mr. Sopko.
Yes.
And Ms. Tomasi.
No.
Madam Co-Chair, that vote does not carry.
Okay.
You counted.
Is there an amended motion on the floor?
And
Fingers.
Motion on the floor for an amended option.
Co-Chair. I move to recommend a budget that would increase by 10%. And without getting into the allocation, that the change from option 2 would be to take 3% out of services and 3% out of BRC to accomplish that 10% budget increase.
I'll second that.
Okay, comments at this point? My comment would be, is there any desire for us to consider public comment?
Yes, I would add the provision that we had on the first motion to accept public comment and leave it to the Budget and Personnel Committee to make those changes for the final recommendation due to the Governor's Office by the 30th.
Do you want to amend your second?
I will amend my second, and then I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. So there's an amended motion that's been seconded, and Ron, now please provide comment.
My question is to the 3 or 4 of you, a quick response to what that means to you from 16 to 10. Is that a doable? What- And not to put you on the spot,
Yeah,
but
no, Mr. Harvey, and actually, I want to clarify, Mr. Lockhart, restate what you said about the remaining 6%. So you're saying an additional 10% ask, you're okay with that?
Right.
Talk to me about the 6% again. I want to make sure I'm fully
So
understanding.
because it's not a linear equation,
right.
so you can't just take 3 out of the green
Yes.
box and 3
Yeah.
out of the.
Yeah,
so you
yeah, the
have
math
to-
behind this kind of messes it up.
you
Yep.
have to Do the nonlinear logarithm in order to calculate what percentage that is, and I'm not calculating it off the top of my head. An engineer may be able to do that, but I'm just telling you that you can figure that out.
Yep.
What it will mean is the larger number gets cut by more than the smaller number.
Okay, so you are still suggesting that you support a decrease to BRC. Am I hearing you
Yes.
correctly? Okay,
Yes.
okay.
That would be the compromise.
That would be the compromise, yes.
Compromising here.
Yep, okay. Thank you.
Scale
Scale it.
Scale the changes to the original percentage.
Maybe that's what the motion should be is.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so the motion to restate, the amended motion is to request a budget option that includes a 10% add that is reallocated and scaled within the 3 bucketed proportions. Subject to review of public comment, vesting final authority with the Personnel Budget and Audit Committee to review that public comment, consider it, make any tweaks necessary, and work with staff to present the final budget request to the governor by September 30th.
Would you
That was a
repeat
great
that?
reiteration of my motion.
Mr. Chairman, can I comment?
Yes.
You know, one of the things that's going through my mind is everybody is struggling, and appropriately so, with what an appropriate ask is when we have a deficit going in from a state standpoint. If Wyoming Business Council received an increase or even was able to hold the line, if the rest of the state was to balance the budget, wouldn't that be a tremendous win for the Wyoming Business Council and show the same level of importance that we're trying to get out of an increase as it stands today? I don't have an answer per se in that. I just pushing that out as trying to frame this conversation maybe a little bit differently than whether or not an increase from the state shows support for the Wyoming Business Council. Because if we got to a balanced budget across the state and we were able to hold the line, that would be a tremendous win.
Ron?
Madam Chairman, the legislature didn't have any problem with earmarking $25 million for endow. I think option 2 is a reasonable solution, but we're not there. So
question.
just in response, it's nice that we can do more with less, and that's what we would be doing.
So the question's been called on the motion. All those in favor of option 3 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Go ahead and take roll call, please.
Thank you. Mr. Bland.
I'm stupid.
Thank you. Mr. Coyne.
No.
Thank you. Ms. DeVore.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Easley.
No.
Ms. Getz.
Aye.
Mr. Harvey.
Aye.
Mr. Hoops.
Aye.
Ms. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Kinsey.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Lockhart.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Moore. Thank you. Mr. Sopko.
Aye.
Thank you. And Ms. Tomasi.
Aye.
Madam Co-Chair, that vote carries.